Angela Darlene McAnulty's life began in chaos. Born into poverty in the 1960s, her early years were marked by tragedy. When Angela was just 5 years old, her mother passed away suddenly, leaving her and her siblings in a state of limbo. With no father in the picture, and extended family members unwilling or unable to step in, Angela and her siblings were thrust into a whirlwind of instability. They were bounced between foster homes, distant relatives, and, at times, left to fend for themselves. Angela's childhood was far from nurturing. The neglect she experienced left deep emotional scars, and by her teenage years, her behavior began to reflect the turmoil within her. She started experimenting with drugs and engaging in petty crimes, often skipping school and running away from foster homes. Those who knew Angela in her youth described her as a troubled, angry girl who desperately craved stability but didn't know how to find it. By the time Angela reached adulthood, her life was already on a precarious trajectory. She had her first child in her late teens, a daughter named Jeanette. Angela's relationship with Jeanette's father was tumultuous and short-lived, and the young mother struggled to provide for her child. Eventually, Jeanette was placed in the care of her biological father and stepmother, a decision made by child welfare authorities who believed the arrangement would provide the stability Angela could not. Angela continued to drift through life, engaging in a series of relationships and moving frequently. She married Richard McAnulty in the late 1990s, a man she hoped would offer her the stability and support she had always sought. Together, they had 2 children. From the outside, Angela appeared to have finally settled down, but beneath the surface, her inner demons were far from conquered. In 2008, Angela regained custody of Jeanette, who was now a teenager. The decision to reunite mother and daughter was celebrated by some in the family, who believed it was a chance for Angela to mend the broken bonds of her past. But what should have been a new beginning quickly turned into a nightmare for Jeanette. When Jeanette moved in with her mother, she was entering a household dominated by Angela's erratic behavior and controlling tendencies. Angela was a strict and authoritarian figure, and her discipline quickly crossed the line into outright abuse. Jeanette was isolated from her siblings, forced to eat separately, and forbidden from participating in family activities. Angela monitored her every move, ensuring that she had no opportunity to form friendships or seek help outside the home. Over the months, the abuse escalated to unimaginable levels. Angela began withholding food from Jeanette, using starvation as a method of control and punishment. The once vibrant teenager began wasting away, her body growing thinner and weaker with each passing day. Teachers and classmates noticed Jeanette's deteriorating condition, but Angela's explanations, always delivered with an air of authority, kept suspicions at bay. Angela's punishments became increasingly violent. She would beat Jeanette for minor infractions, often using belts or wooden spoons. Sometimes, she would force the girl to sleep on the floor without a blanket or pillow as a form of discipline. Jeanette's cries for help were muffled, not only by her abuser but by a system that repeatedly failed to intervene. Jeanette Maples was a child trapped in a prison of silence, her suffering hidden in plain sight. But the question remains, how could so many people miss the signs? In the months leading up to Jeanette's death, the warning signs were everywhere. Teachers noticed her wearing long sleeves even on hot days, likely to hide the bruises and scars on her arms. Neighbors overheard shouting from the McAnulty home but dismissed it as typical family arguments. Even extended family members who visited occasionally sensed that something was wrong, but hesitated to interfere. On December 9, 2009, the situation reached its tragic conclusion. That evening, paramedics responded to a frantic 911 call from Angela. She claimed that Jeanette had collapsed and was unresponsive. When emergency responders arrived at the McAnulty home, they found Jeanette lying on the floor, her body battered and bruised. The teenager was emaciated, her frame so frail that she weighed only 50 pounds at the time of her death. Despite their best efforts, paramedics were unable to save Jeanette. She was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. Her injuries painted a harrowing picture of prolonged abuse, broken ribs, open sores, and evidence of malnourishment so severe that it shocked even seasoned medical professionals. As investigators began to unravel the events leading up to Jeanette's death, Angela's story quickly fell apart. She initially claimed that Jeanette had fallen in the bathroom, but forensic evidence told a different story. The bruises on Jeanette's body were in various stages of healing, indicating a pattern of ongoing physical abuse. The squalid conditions of Jeanette's room further contradicted Angela's attempts to portray herself as a caring mother. Angela and her husband, Richard, were both arrested and charged in connection with Jeanette's death. Richard, though less directly involved in the abuse, admitted during interrogation that he had witnessed Angela's treatment of Jeanette but did nothing to stop it. His silence, he claimed, was born out of fear of Angela's wrath. The trial of Angela McAnulty was one of the most high-profile cases in Oregon's recent history. Prosecutors described her as a manipulative and sadistic woman who derived pleasure from exerting control over her vulnerable daughter. They presented evidence of the extensive abuse Jeanette suffered, including testimony from medical experts, law enforcement officers, and even neighbors who had witnessed disturbing behavior. The defense, in contrast, attempted to humanize Angela by focusing on her troubled past. They argued that her actions were the result of deep-seated psychological issues stemming from her own abusive childhood. But the jury was not swayed. After weeks of testimony, they found Angela guilty of aggravated murder and sentenced her to death, making her the first woman in Oregon to receive the death penalty in over half a century. Richard McAnulty, though spared the death penalty, was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his role in enabling the abuse. His inaction, prosecutors argued, was a betrayal of his duty to protect his stepdaughter. Jeanette's death sent shockwaves through the Eugene community and beyond. Her case became a rallying cry for child welfare reform, prompting calls for greater accountability and intervention in suspected cases of abuse. Advocacy groups highlighted the missed opportunities to save Jeanette, pointing to systemic failures in schools, social services, and community reporting. More than a decade after her death, Jeanette Maples remains a symbol of the urgent need to protect vulnerable children. Her story is a haunting reminder that abuse often hides in plain sight, and that it is the responsibility of every individual teachers, neighbors, family members to speak up when something seems wrong. Angela McAnulty remains on death row, her appeals pending as the justice system moves through its slow and methodical process. Meanwhile, Jeanette's memory lives on, a tragic yet powerful testament to the importance of vigilance, empathy, and action in the face of suffering. Jeanette's death did not just leave a void in her family but ignited a firestorm of public outrage and grief. For many in Eugene, Oregon, the case was not just about Angela McAnulty's monstrous actions, but about the glaring gaps in the systems meant to protect children like Jeanette. As details of her suffering came to light, the community began to question how such severe abuse could go unnoticed for so long. Schools were among the first institutions to face scrutiny. Teachers who had interacted with Jeanette recalled moments when they felt something was amiss. She often appeared withdrawn, avoiding eye contact and shrinking back if anyone reached toward her. Some noted her persistent fatigue and unkempt appearance, but Angela was quick to deflect any concerns, citing discipline issues or fabricated illnesses. Social services also came under fire. Records showed that Jeanette had been flagged in the past due to concerns about neglect and mistreatment while living with her biological father. However, the file was closed after Angela regained custody, with authorities assuming that reuniting the child with her biological mother would be the best course of action. This assumption proved fatal. Jeanette Maples' case exposed the painful truth assumptions can kill. The assumption that a mother would inherently protect her child. The assumption that quiet suffering is not suffering at all. Advocacy groups sprang into action, using Jeanette's story as a rallying cry. Organizations like Prevent Child Abuse America and local charities pushed for mandatory training programs for educators and healthcare workers to identify signs of abuse more effectively. Legislators in Oregon began drafting proposals to strengthen oversight in child welfare cases, including regular follow-ups for children placed back into the custody of previously flagged guardians. For the McAnulty family, the fallout was both immediate and enduring. Angela's two younger children, who had been spared the worst of their mother's wrath, were placed into foster care. They carried with them the weight of their sister's tragic end and the stigma of their family name. Over the years, psychologists working with them have spoken about the challenges they face: feelings of guilt for surviving, anger at their parents, and the deep scars left by witnessing years of abuse. Richard McAnulty, serving his 25-year sentence, has remained largely out of the public eye. Reports suggest that he expressed remorse for his inaction, though many believe his regret is overshadowed by his culpability. "I was scared of Angela," he reportedly told investigators during his trial, but his fear came at the cost of Jeanette's life, a truth that lingers over him in prison. Angela herself has become a polarizing figure in Oregon's legal and social landscape. While on death row, she has reportedly maintained her innocence in certain aspects of the case, insisting that she did not intend for Jeanette to die. However, the overwhelming evidence of her cruelty leaves little room for doubt in the public's mind. Legal experts predict that her appeals will drag on for years, as is often the case in capital punishment trials. Meanwhile, Jeanette's legacy continues to grow in unexpected ways. In the years since her death, local communities in Eugene have established annual candlelight vigils to honor her memory. These events are more than a mourning of her loss, they are a call to action, a reminder to never turn a blind eye to abuse. One of the most poignant outcomes of Jeanette's case is the Jeanette Maples Act, a piece of legislation passed in Oregon in 2013. The act mandates more rigorous oversight of child welfare cases, including a requirement that caseworkers conduct surprise visits to high-risk households. It also imposes stricter penalties on adults who fail to report suspected abuse. In life, Jeanette Maples was a girl silenced by fear. In death, her voice echoes louder than ever, a beacon for change. Her story has also inspired works of art and literature, as writers, filmmakers, and musicians grapple with the emotions her case evokes. A documentary titled Jeanette's Silence premiered at a local film festival in 2015, earning critical acclaim for its sensitive yet unflinching portrayal of her life and death. Schools across Oregon now use the film as an educational tool, teaching students and educators alike about the importance of speaking up in the face of injustice. For those closest to Jeanette, the wounds of her loss remain raw. Extended family members, many of whom admitted feeling uneasy about Angela's parenting but hesitated to intervene, live with the weight of what-ifs. What if they had called Child Protective Services? What if they had demanded custody of Jeanette themselves? These questions have no answers, only the lingering pain of regret. One of Jeanette's cousins, now an adult, has become an outspoken advocate for child abuse prevention. Jeanette didn't have a voice, she said during a public event. But we can be her voice now. We can make sure this never happens again. The case of Angela Darlene McAnulty is not just a story of tragedy, it is a story of lessons learned at an unbearable cost. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable realities of abuse, how it hides in plain sight, how it thrives in silence, and how it leaves scars that ripple far beyond the victim. Even as Angela remains on death row, awaiting the outcome of her appeals, the community she once terrorized has vowed to ensure that her actions are never forgotten. Jeanette Maples will forever be remembered, not just as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. Her life, though tragically short, has sparked a movement to protect the vulnerable and demand accountability from those tasked with their care. In the end, the story of Angela McAnulty is not just about the darkness she embodied. It is about the light that emerged from that darkness, a light that continues to guide those determined to make the world a safer place for children like Jeanette.